Hello, YouTube. I just got in from the shop and realized I haven't posted a video for a while, so here I am, and here's what I've got going. Subject of the video is copper knives. Not steel, not stone, but copper. This video brought to you by, well, I don't even have anything cool to do except show you Amy Coyle's business card for Hook Zen. She does a lot of my advertising. She actually did this hat for me. And check her out. You can check her out on Facebook. You can check her out. Just look her up, and she does decals, events, all kinds of cool stuff. So back to the sharp and pointy. Okay, so getting down to it, copper knives. Why copper knives? Really, we look at a period in history that is overlooked, that is disregarded in many cases. The time when man took natural occurring float copper, trap copper, near pure copper ores, and by one way or another worked the malleable metal into usable forms, whether it was ornamental or whether it was tools. A lot of people say, well, how would they go from the Stone Age to making, to forging, hammering, and forming a metallic blade? Well, I think if you use a very small amount of imagination, just a little bit of thought on the matter. Okay, how do you work stone? Well, you work stone by striking it, by knapping it, percussion, flaking, pressure flaking, all that fun stuff, and abrading, which is not much different than hitting this as a nugget, as a piece of ore, and seeing that it deforms, and progressively continuing to do so, rubbing it against a piece of abrasive stone, sedimentary, perhaps sandstone would be quite common and abrasive, and being able to refine that shape. Now, why do I do copper knives? I do copper knives because my daughter, Elizabeth, originally started making copper knives. She did this when she was younger because she wanted to forge. Or she was out around the forge. She'd been camping since she was a couple weeks old, so she was always around the primitive camps and the crafting that went on at those. So she had difficulty moving steel, ferrous alloys. Copper was easier to move, plus it could be cold forged at the end to harden. Also, it looks kind of cool. You have this red metal here that is quite pleasing visually. The aesthetic value is pretty damn high. So she doesn't make them anymore so much, so I started making the copper knives to just kind of diversify what I do. Now, this particular one has a bare leg bone handle, and it's been dyed and sealed, and it was actually been nature cleaned. So, I didn't sand this down or anything, which gives it a nice rustic, primitive look. And I did not sand the blade down. I just knocked some of the oxide off, whereas this one, you can see how I've sanded it down. It's much cleaner. I actually kind of like the more primitive look. Now the question is, how do I make a copper knife? Okay. Well, let me find one that. There's a couple ways that I make copper knives. In this case, this was taken from a large chunk billet of copper, if you would. that was basically done in a factory into not a cube, but kind of a rectangle bar stock, I guess. Heavy bar stock, and then it was hot forged and then cold forged to harden it. Now, these obviously are not steel blades. They don't hold up as far as edge retention like steel, but that's because it's copper. It's a softer metal, and frankly, if it held up, we'd probably still be using copper knives versus steel. But for historical and aesthetic value, novelty, if you will, it's still a very cool piece. So in that case, I forged that from bar stock. Another way that I do that is I will take copper ore. I can take copper ore, I put it into a crucible, I melt that and allow it to form into an ingot. I allow it to cool. I do some stock removal to the exterior so that I remove as many surface inclusions as possible. Now, this is an example of that, and you can see some of the inclusions within the metal itself. Now, there is an overall mass reduction from the ingot. As you forge it down and compress it and consolidate everything, it does reduce in size. Let me show you another one. Now, this one you can actually see a lot of grain texture to the surface. And this has been cleaned down. This has only been cleaned down to about 120 grit. However, in this particular example, I have taken cut-off sections of copper. So basically, when I had a piece that I needed to cut off because it was ragged, it was broken, or I just needed to reduce the size of the billet, I saved that up and basically do the same process with the ore. I heat it in a crucible, let it come up to a molten state. I keep it there for a while, try to let everything come to more of a homogeneous mixture, I suppose. Obviously, it's not pure copper. There's going to be some trace alloys, trace elements in that. Let it come to a homogeneous liquid state, and then allow it to cool once more. Once it's cool, clean the exterior, and then hot forge it down. Eventually, going through some thermocycling just to try to strengthen it. Now, it doesn't work the same as steel, but one thing that it does do. One thing it will do is it will reduce grain structure, the grain size, so that it is less brittle. Now, copper is generally not brittle. However, if you work it too hot for too long, it will basically increase the size of the grain structure and become brittle. Now, this is an interesting piece. This is actually This is a remelt is what it is. So I had several cut-offs that I worked into this piece. Now, this is a fair size tribal knife with a deer leg bone handle. I didn't do the dag blade. I did not notch it in as in this example for the binding. Now, these are not fully historically accurate, as in the interior of the bone, instead of being filled with pitch, is filled with epoxy resin, stabilizing it. There is some machine work, hand tool, power tool work done to the blades that I do myself, as well as the wax thread, which is similar in appearance and use as sinew. It is resin stabilized, which basically means that after I wrap it and I secure it, I go ahead and soak it with a resin so that it becomes stronger. Now, in this particular piece, the color varies quite a bit. between the two. This is more red. This one, if the camera's picking it up, this one actually has a little more of a yellow tint to it. And I'm unsure why that is. Out of the three I made that day, this particular ingot just happened to turn out a little more yellow in color. So I don't know if that is due to alloy composition, or if it was, or what the factor was. Maybe it had something to do with the way that I did the pour. Well, it really wasn't a pour, but the way that I made the ingot to begin with. So just to go through some pieces that I've done recently, and I kind of like that one. It's just kind of a cool little piece. Blades like this, they could be used for war clubs. They could be used for knives. They could be used for spears. They were quite versatile in many, many aspects. So some of them I do a wrap. Most of them I do the binding. And I really enjoy making these. So, yeah. Oh. Copper blades. Pretty, fun, cool part of history. Check it out, YouTube's got some good reference, and, all else fails, if you're old-fashioned, you can always read a book, which is a lot like the internet before they had the internet, where they would take words, which is like, what we do with texting, and they would put it on paper and then put a bunch of papers together, and smart people read that stuff. But anyway, I've got to get off here. Once more, check out Amy on HooksN, and everybody have a great night. I'll catch you later. See you back in the forge.